John, thank you very much for speaking to me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
John, where were you born?
I was born just up the road here at Parklands Hospital. I was a very small lad at birth and a late developer, and grew up in Durban North, and went to school here until getting a cricket bursary to go to Michael House, which obviously then changed my story.
What was your relationship like with your parents?
Oh, we're a very close family, and my father is a great outdoors man, taught me to fish and to run around in the bush, and introduced me to a number of stories. My parents actively encouraged my sense of humor from a young age. I think I've always had that inclination and desire to make people laugh, and I've carried that right through my life. Very interesting, my grandmother, who I nicknamed Wombat, and I used that name in the book obviously, was very close to the character in Spud, ironically. She unfortunately had Alzheimer's, but she had it from quite a young age, relatively young age, in her early 60s. And I used to find it very funny as a boy when she would obviously have her little moments. And as she never read Spud, she unfortunately died the same year Spud was released. But perhaps that is a good thing. she may have held it against me. But there's some funny stories. My gran, I mean, she started to lose it and lose her grip, but she actually got happier, ironically, as she sort of descended into a world of her sort of diminishing brain capacity. And in her last years, I used to visit her with my mum once a week, and she slowly developed this impression that I was her boyfriend arriving every week. So I had this quite funny notion where for the last 2 years of my gran's life, I would sort of flirt with her every Tuesday morning. So I didn't feel so bad when I used her character in my book in the end. But she was also just a real character, and I think also when you surround by characters, you start to think about the world in characters. And as somebody who would then become an actor and a writer, my family are all characters in their own right, my sister too, and I think there's something to that. And I look at those antecedents as to why I've become the person I have, and why I try and find humor in just about everything.
Speaking of your sister, she wasn't included in the Spud characters.
No, she wasn't, and she's furious about that. Although, I mean, I said to her that she wouldn't have come out well. Nobody comes out particularly well in Spud, but she feels that she's missed out on her moment of fame. But now she's a very interesting character. She's just this week got her PhD in Philadelphia. She's doing sociology, and she's now the first ever Dr. Funderate, Doctor of Sociology. So we're very proud of her, and she's a strong-minded feminist, and she keeps me in check, and she challenges me. She really does. She's not somebody who's like a rah-rah sister. She loves Spud, she loves the stories, loves the books, but she challenges me and keeps me on my toes, so that's her role.
Is there a reason you wanted Spud to be an only child?
Yes, primarily because I felt, Spud really works as he's the sane island, and around him are insane people. And at school, he's obviously surrounded by the crazy eight, who are pretty much all insane, by insane teachers. And I think it really works as Spud being the straight man, and around him a funny man. Now, I felt a sister or a brother would dilute that home environment where you've got his dad who's a maniac, the mother sort of drinks a lot and is quite unhinged, and then Wombat is going mad. And somehow that combination just worked comedically for me. I think I probably will end up using my sister's character in a story one day, but I think it's going to be a different kind of story. So that was the reason why I made him an only child. Now, I also felt, who would be the kind of boy that would write so compulsively in his diary about every event that happened in his life, or seemingly happened in his life. And I felt it was probably a lonely boy who didn't have siblings, a boy who was a bit of a loner, and that diary almost becomes his brother or his family.
As a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Originally, I was very taken on being a pilot, obviously, in my early years, because, I've just had this fascination with flying. Not that I have any sort of scientific sort of knowledge at all about it, but then as I grew up, I started to want to be an actor, and a great actor. I wanted to be famous. I wanted to, like you are as a child, you dream of fame. And I think as my acting career went on, and as I studied university and so forth, that changed. That desire for fame sort of melted away with my immaturity, and I started to see that what I most wanted to do was to make really good work and to try and reach people and to to create quality shows, and to whatever I did, I wanted to have my imprint of my humor on it, and so things have shifted, and now obviously writing has become probably my true talent, and I've always felt I'm a good actor, but I don't think I'm anywhere near as good an actor as I am a writer. So despite going back onto stage next year, which some might think is a crazy idea, but I think that development of writing happened through acting, and in a way I can't separate them. And I think when I was writing Spud, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I was on the road, and I think that experience of performing at night for a live audience, sketch comedy, and then writing a book during the day, I was very aware of comic rhythms and the science of comedy that I was getting to learn by my theatrical sort of work. So it all sort of got entangled as I moved forward.
What was school like for John van Ruit?
School was a mixed bag for me, and I think I meet so many people now, and they go to boarding school and they go, oh, it's fantastic, it's such a great time.
Yeah.
And there's almost like no acknowledgement that anything bad ever happened. It was just purely good times. Whereas my experience was a very tough first year at Michael House. I think I was very immature too. I don't think I was kind of emotionally ready for what was about to hit me. I went there thinking that the place was going to be sort of very stuck up, snooty, impressive young men who were like Etonian, sort of on a higher sort of plane to myself, and I found a sort of school of madmen, and a school that had its own sort of logic, and I think in a way I was small. I think I was an easy victim and an easy target, a late developer, and also I was quite chatty and had a sort of cracked a few jokes at the wrong times, which quite often got me into trouble. But aside from that, I had a really tough start, and everything sort of turned around for me in my second year at Michael House when I was in Oliver, which I obviously utilized later in Spud, for Spud. But things started to turn around for me at that stage because I suddenly had a girlfriend, or had a few girls sort of circling my orbit, from being a Nigel no friends guy with no girlfriends to suddenly having some interest, and I think aside from that I started to find my feet. You no longer are having to what we call cack there, or slave, or fag for people, so that's also a big thing, and I started to sort of grow into my skin a little bit. And then as it went on, I enjoyed school more and more, and I think that's been reflected very much in Spud's journey. But certainly I'm not one who completely forgets the sort of tough moments, and it's not that I blame the school for those moments. I think boys will be boys, but I think they also gave me a perspective on my boarding school experience that isn't just, I love it, it's amazing, I would definitely send my son there. It's slightly guarded, saying boys are quite at times hard on other boys, and that's a reality, and I think that doesn't change.
Yes. It's been highly publicized that you went to Michael House, and then Spud was there on more of a bursary for academics. You were there on a cricket scholarship.
Correct.
Why did you flip it over like that?
Well, just because I also needed getting back to Spud's character, who is this boy who's so intelligent, and why is he writing this intelligent diary? And I needed to almost justify to myself how a boy could spend so much time and effort writing his life out, with wit and a slight sense of humor and irony.
You stayed on for post-matric?
Yes.
What made you stay on for post-matric? Did you know what you wanted to do? Did you not know what you wanted to do?
You know what, I was very immature. I mean, my first 4 months of matric I was 16. So, obviously now people start school a bit later. That sounds really young. But I was a very young 16. I was 16, I looked about 12. So there was a sense that the boys around me were more physically mature, more emotionally mature. And I think there was a sense from my parents, from the people, the teachers, that a year at Michael House, a sort of a finishing year where I could start my university career by studying some subjects, but also you have a catch-up year, would be quite useful to me. And as I got to matric, I started to enjoy the school more and more, and I actually loved my post-matric year because you'd go to 3 classes a day, we did wonderful activities, we went to Lake Malawi, because one of the boys is Malawian, we had a great school tour there. I feel when I look back, it was probably by far my happiest year at Michael House. It was also a smaller group, and we bonded, and just somehow when you get to that age, I was able to turn 18 and to sort of feel like I belonged at a school like that, and I did feel that by the end. So it's quite an interesting dynamic, and I think a lot of people thought I might have written a post-matric year for Spud, and I I flirted with it in the fourth book, and I think the reader for a long time thinks it may come, but doesn't.
So then from there you went on to study at the University of Natal. What did you study there?
Well, since I had played Oliver in 1990, I was hugely inspired to be an actor, and I was passionate about it, and obviously I'd studied drama, and all I wanted to do was study drama. But my parents were a little concerned that obviously there'd be no work and I would be bumming off them for the rest of my life. So I sort of combined it with industrial psychology, bluffed them into thinking that I might go into sort of PR or HR or something like that and get a decent job in a sort of decent, reputable company, when obviously I had no plans to do that at all. But it kept them happy, and obviously the extra year at Michael House meant that I had a few extra credits. So I ended up doing 3 majors. So it didn't look too bad, but then I stayed on and did honours in drama. I love drama. I mean, I arrived there in my first year drama class, and there was about 70 or 60 or 70 people, and there was only about 4 guys or 6 guys, and the rest beautiful girls. And it was like, wow, after Michael House, this is like, I don't know, it felt like I was dreaming in some sort of fantasy. So, and I just loved it. I loved the fact that we weren't just, doing acting and things, we were studying the craft of acting, and my eyes were being open to things while I was at university, like the method and using the method, and doing some pretty wacky things and experimentation. And it was, I stayed on for honours and then did a master's degree. And the master's degree was more to buy myself time, because by then I decided I want to be a professional actor. And I, at that stage, started writing work that would then ultimately push my acting career and give me work, because that's the one bonus of being a writer-actor, is that you can supply yourself with the vehicle to show off your acting talents, as opposed to so many actors who are waiting for the right role to be given to them. And obviously that's always a difficult thing, because waiting is tough. So that gave me an edge. I was a busy actor because I was giving myself work. And I think at that stage I started to realize that I had a facility to write plays. I don't think my early plays were particularly good, but they showed enough that I had a certain understanding of character and dialogue and I suppose progression, how to put something together. And so from that stage onwards, lecturers, etc., people started to push me and say, I think you have the ability to write, you must keep writing. But obviously at that stage I was purely still on the theatre bed. So
what was the first thing that you did leaving university?
The first thing I did leaving university was Ben Voss and I, we put on a comedy about cricket, which we took down to Grahamstown, and it was, I think about it now, it was pretty out there kind of stuff, but we had some humour to it, and people came and saw our show and started to develop a little following. I also wrote a play called War Cry, which was the forerunner of Spud, and it was using my boarding school experiences, but it was a group of matric boys at a sort of very towards the end of their era, and it was a sort of a drama with a bit of comedy in it, but it was very different to Spud and feel. But quite a few of the characters I then have taken into Spud and adapted and sort of furthered. So that was something that happened at 25, and I won a Vita Award for the script, for the best original script, and that suddenly sort of sparked things off, where people started to talk about me as a writer. And part of the battle with being a writer is that you've got to believe you're a writer. And that's half the battle. It's one thing saying you're a writer, but you feel until people have given you some feedback or something you've written has had success, you feel almost like a bit of a fraud calling yourself a writer. Yes. Like you do when you're writing a book, and people always say, oh, here you're writing a book. You don't want to talk about it, because if it hasn't been published yet, you don't want to almost telegraph it in case it is a bit disastrous, because you don't have that confidence. So, for a writer, these things gave me confidence, and I started to build and develop.
One of the main things of being an actor is accepting rejection. Were you ever rejected for plays?
Yes. Acting is a life of rejection, and it's of those sweet moments where you do get the role and you do get something juicy. And I've had, I think, both experiences. I've been rejected from plays that I thought I definitely was going to get into, but I've also landed some amazing roles, and I had the chance to, albeit in a small production, to play Hamlet, and I've played Hallie from Master Harold and the Boys, 2 characters that I absolutely adored playing. And in War Cry, I had a nice character part, which I wrote for myself, and obviously in the Mamba shows, which came later, to be in a 2-man sketch comedy where you end up playing 20 characters in 80 minutes. in a whirligig of sort of insanity and nonsense, that was also a thrill. So I've had some very, very cool moments on stage and acted with some really good actors too. So there is a love there. There's a real love there for acting, and I do certainly respect that. That was where it all began for me.
What advice do you have for young actors for handling that rejection?
You know, you've just got to be strong. I mean, it's you know, if you start tanking after your first rejection, then I don't think acting is for you. You need to be in a sort of safer profession. The nature of acting is that you sometimes your best work, what you feel is your best work, is never recognized, and sometimes what you feel is just your bog variety standard work is celebrated, and you can't control these kind of things. You can't control whether your play is going to play to 3 people or 300 people, and there are nights where you walk out there with you think a great play and there's only 8 people in the audience, and there's a sort of embarrassment about that nobody wants to see you, but you still have to go and thump through your play for those 8 people who turned up, and there's some tough nights in the theatre, but at the same time there's that moment where you walk out to a packed auditorium who go bananas when you walk on stage, and the thrill of that, where you just, the adrenaline just kicks you to another place. I mean, you don't get that in writing. You know, writing is a far more, there are hills and dales, but it's a very secluded, hermetic existence in comparison.
And how did you meet Ben Voss?
I met Ben Voss. I was in university, and I heard of these 2 guys who weren't in the university drama department. One who was an engineer, which is Ben, and his brother who was in the classics department were directing Oedipus the King for the classics department. Were celebrating, I think it was some sort of 100 years of Greek, something to do with the 100 years, or the Greek consulate had got involved, and it was a sort of huge big play they were putting on in the open air theatre, and they were looking for the smaller roles to be taken up from the drama department. I had sort of quite prominence in the drama department at the time, so I was roped in to play an old shepherd who brings the bad news to Oedipus that he has got it on with his mum. And so, so obviously I still looking about 15, I had a whole lot of powder in my hair to try to make me look like an old shepherd. And Ben played Oedipus in a very screamy and hysterical way, but even then there was a brilliance to it, and he was an engineer. And we just hit it off immediately. We had a shared sense of humour. He was working at SAPI, and then I wrote my first one-act play, which was my honours piece, and I asked Ben to be in it, to play this sort of maniac guy who's abusing his wife, and I played the deranged younger brother, and then there was a girl from the department who played like the wife stroke love interest. And Ben would come screaming back. He would do his engineering, and then he'd come screaming back from SAPI for a lunch hour production, and then hurtle back to SAPI to engineer up in the afternoon. And it was during that time he started to go, I don't want to be an engineer, I want to be an actor. And I think he started to find, so we almost sort of bloomed together. He out of engineering, but with a natural talent, and me through the drama department. We sort of emerged. So when we both sort of became professional actors. When I say professional, we were relying on that to earn money. And we both did strange things, like we dressed up as clowns and handed out biscuits in supermarkets, and you know, I did pizza delivery, and I mean, it's not like there was a sort of silver spoon. I had to really sort of fight hard in those early days to pay the rent and to keep the dream alive. And we started to form this comedic alliance that is still to this day there. And just, you know, I've always been writing Spud, but even still, I think there's a real sense that our futures will intersect.
What is Black Mamba?
Well, Black Mamba and Green Mamba were really began as Ben and I sitting on a pier in 2002, Durban Pier, and we'd had a few beers, and we were talking about our future, and we decided that we were both sick of being sort of quite well known in Durban, but little beyond that, and we decided we wanted to do something comedically that was classic. And that was the word we used. We wanted to be classic. And now, classic means a lot of things to different people, but I think the idea was we wanted to go beyond just making people laugh, but we wanted something that was very clever, very sharp, witty. And we started to settle on this idea with Greg Coetzee, who became our sort of consultant advisor and director of Green Mamba, the first one, the idea of sketch comedy. And the idea that sketch comedy had sort of run aground in South Africa, that stand-up comedy was big, but sketch comedy was sort of a missing, since the 70s, hadn't really sort of been pushed. So I think to a degree, I felt sort of with my writing ability and Ben's innate sort of brilliant comedy on-stage ability, that we had a good combination where I was the straight man on stage, and Ben was the funny man, and then I obviously brought a lot of the first draft sort of wacky ideas that ran around my head and the writing to the party, and Ben, who's also a good writer, would then ad, and somehow the combination really worked. So we took our first show, Green Mamba, to Grahamstown in 2002 with sort of grand hopes that it might do something, and the entire thing just sold out. And suddenly we were being offered, come to the Civic, come to the Baxter, and within 3 months we were touring full-time Green Mamba. And we ended up doing, and then Black Mamba became the sequel to that. And we ended up doing sort of 600 performances in 4.5 years, 5 years. We really were just going and performing. And it was during that time that I started to realize that I needed something to occupy me during the days. So that's where a small writing project sort of developed.
So you've mentioned that Spud kind of grew out of that play that you wrote earlier. What made you decide to take that and turn it into a book?
I was in Zimbabwe, and I was, Ben and I, just our first big tour there, and we'd been in Zimbabwe 2.5 weeks, and we had gone through some stress because ZANU PF were clamping down on freedom of speech, and we weren't very complimentary to Mugabe. It was quite a political satire at the Mamba shows. And we had a disgraced stakes. We had all these disgraced politicians and leaders around the world were riding horses, and it's Robert Mugabe actually riding Banana Republic would win our disgraced stake at the end, sort of by pulling a sort of a dodgy maneuver and stealing an election, and via that sort of cutting everyone off, he would win the disgraced stakes. And obviously we had to change that. And then we started having these guys with dark glasses following us around, and it became quite stressful, but also exciting. I mean, we never felt under threat, but we were under no illusions that we were sort of being watched, and we had to watch our step. And I think at the end of this tour I was quite tired, and I think we'd been on a bit of a sort of been on the treadmill for quite a long time, doing a lot of performances. And I was in my hotel room, and it was the night before we flew back, and I literally I just suddenly went back to that first day in boarding school, and at boarding school, and I don't know why I went back there, but I think perhaps because I was longing for home slightly. I sort of felt that old homesick feeling, and I picked up the hotel pad and a pen, and I wrote "I Lie Awake" and what became the first page of Spud. Now, obviously, at the time, it was literally a doodle. I had no idea this was anything more than just a doodle in a hotel room because I was bored or sort of whatever, in a funny mood. And somehow the doodle didn't go away, and I remember on the plane sort of writing on the back of the paper, just carrying on the story, and then going home and writing it down onto the computer, and then just allowing it to go. And I went, and then, there were weeks where I didn't write, and then I'd come back to it, and then we went on the road, and I found being on the road for sometimes 6-8 weeks, we'd be in another city or town doing Mamba every night. I had all these hours free in the day, and I started to go, and obviously the further you go, the more it sort of becomes like a Frankenstein, where it starts to overwhelm you. So it became my pet secret project, and Ben obviously loved telling everyone that I was working on a book, and then everyone would be like, "What's the book about?" And I'd be like, "Well, it's about boarding school," and they'll be like, "Right, yeah, like Harry Potter." I'd be like, and you just, it was so hard to kind of in any way want to talk about it, because you just were convinced that it was going to be nothing but a terrible failure. But that's how it started.
And how did it get into the hands of the Penguins?
Well, after I completed it, and I'd worked with my drama lecturer, actually, Tamar Mesk, and she'd been quite instrumental in editing the first book. And there still was no real sense, no publisher had seen it, but there was a sense that there was some funny stuff in it. I just didn't know whether anybody else would find it funny. I just thought, I gave it my best shot. I gave it to Roy Sargent, who I'd been working with theatrically in Cape Town, as he'd been sort of a dramaturg for me, overseeing some of the plays I'd been writing at that time, and had shown an interest in my career. And I thought, well, I'd send it to him just to get feedback. And he gave back feedback that he was rolling on the carpet, and it was hysterical. And that he went, "This is going to be a bestseller, boy, a bestseller." And I thought he was just winding me up. Obviously it was hugely encouraging to hear that. And he said, "Now, I know someone in Penguin called Alison Lowry, who I have a long history with, and whatever. I want you to send the manuscript to her." And he said, I've phoned her and I've told her, and she's going to expect it." So I was like, wow, this is suddenly hugely exciting. So, I went, charged off, got the manuscript printed, and then sent it off to Penguin Books, to this Alison Lowry. And then sat and waited and bit my nails, and the months ticked by, and as the months went by, I started to think, this is not going to happen. And then after 4 months, I got an email from Alison to say, "We are loving your book, hang 5, I need certain people to look at it." but that was all. So I knew they loved it, but I didn't know whether that meant they were going to publish it.
Yes.
And then about 2 weeks later, I got the official word that it was going to be published. And I literally did my nut. I mean, it was the most exciting thing. Forget book sales and all the rest. That was the moment. I mean, it was just such a thrill to be published. I mean, that's all I really ever expected or hoped for, rather than expected. And that was just one of those moments where I can still remember that moment to this day.
Can you describe that feeling of holding the book for the first time with your name on it?
It was very bizarre because I was at Hilton College, of all places, holding a book about Marc Williams. And I opened up this package and there were 3 copies of Spud, the first edition. And it just, you know, you can't explain it. My hands were trembling. My first instinct was so beautiful and it smells like a book. You know, it just smelled like a real book. And it's funny how your senses are activated, but I was just in heaven, and I just wanted to start reading. I just wanted to read it because I just wanted to read it and feel what it was like to read my own work in a book. It's such a kick, and unfortunately, you only get that kick once. You know,
yes.
I mean, every time you get your book, the book you've written, it's beautiful, but you don't get that same blown away. Oh my God! It's surreal. You detach from yourself.
What does it take to be a writer?
Well, that's an interesting question. Excuse me. Writing takes a few things. It takes a determination, a bloody mindedness, and an ability to be by yourself for long periods and not lose your marbles in your own company. I think it also takes a sense of that you're on a mission, a sense that you're doing something here that is larger than yourself. And I think if you get that sense about you, you get that momentum. But it is like climbing a very high mountain. I mean, be under no illusions that it's a total grind. And for a long time, it feels like you're just treading water and you're not going anywhere. It feels like that peak still remains so high. But then suddenly you find yourself 8 months in and you're already halfway up. And obviously you get closer and closer to the end, and it just seems to reel itself in. As you go, you get more momentum. And then for me, editing is huge too. So I mean, it's not just the writing of the first draft. A lot of the comedy and the sort of delight of Spud comes in the edits, because I use my big block of story that I've got and I start chiseling it and filing it away and teasing the humor out and working on the rhythms, and that's where for me the real creativity comes in. So I like that editing process far more than I like the vomit out draft, which is that 9 months or 10 months or however long it takes to crank out your big story and sort of create the framework.
Do you plan out your storylines while you're doing it, like have separate storylines and then try and bring them together?
I plan, and this does disappoint some people, but it's like explaining how I make my sausages in the sausage factory. But I plan everything. Like right now, you'd be probably quite surprised at how I smash it up. I start with a huge notebook of ideas, then it goes to another notebook where I cut the bad ideas and all the ideas I'm not going to use, and keep the good ideas. I then create a proper diary, like an IE a day, and I work out every single day for the year how long my year is going to be. I divide that into terms, into holidays. So then I've got the actual physical structure. Yes. Every term is divided into a long weekend in the middle, so I have two sort of 4 week, generally 4 or 5 week sections, and then I divide all those into single weeks and then into days, and then I break it up and I start then taking my notebook full of ideas and I start transposing that into particular days. But now that changes around. So for example, in summer there will be a cricket on Saturday, but I don't have to have that cricket match, neither do I have to have practice on Tuesday or Thursday, but I'll write it in so that I create a diary for Spud, so I know where he is at all times. And there's a clear through line for me that I can tell you where Spud is at any moment in any day, even though I'm not writing about that. Yes. And I may choose to write nothing on that day, but I still, in my head, he's gone to cricket practice, he's gone to school, he's done his prep, and he's done his laundry, or he's done whatever, menial things. But it's important for me to keep that element of him living and truly living this life. So I then get it down to what I'm going to do that day, and that's when I start writing. Now that takes me many months to get to that point of going, this is exactly where I want it in this moment. But once I've got it, for example, I might just say cop shop sequence for Crazy 8, which would be, I don't know then whether it's going to be Rambo and Spud, or whether it's going to be the full complement with Garlic, Boggo, Fatty. Do I want everybody? Who do I want to bring in? What do I want to create from that scene? And what is Spud's through line in that scene? So every single moment I beat up, and then I write it. And then when I write it, I just go. I literally, like a man possessed, I just thunder it down. I don't almost let my cranial brain interrupt. I just let a creative process happen. Then I go back and look at it and separate the wheat from the chaff. I look at the stuff that's funny, I look at the stuff that's dramatic, and then I file that down, okay? And then basically in the editing process, that's all filed down. I squeeze it from about 150,000 words to about 115. So I lose almost a third of the book in the editing process, but that's because I've got too many words. I've written too much. File away and keep the stuff that I absolutely want. So it is a process of almost sieving for diamonds and then polishing the diamonds, and it's graft. So when I get to the end of a book, there's a sense of real release and I feel that with this final book, that I've thrown everything at it. There's nothing I've left in the holster. That is as good as a book as I could write, and I've been through that thing more times than you can imagine, and that's why I can't read it now. You know, it's not like the old days where I can open it up and it's done and I can't open it anymore.
Well, after all of that hard work, then you get critics. How do you handle those critics?
Well, you know, generally the critics it's been quite interesting. I mean, the critics were very positive with Spud, the first Spud, generally. And then thereafter, you don't get reviewed so much with a series. What happens is they start talking about what's happened to the series and the sense of the epic nature of the series and all the books you've sold and the movie, and you start getting less interviews and more sort of opinion pieces on Spud and this phenomenon of Spud. But you know, every now and again you do get a stinging review, you know, and that certainly happens. And what I try and do is I read that and I try and see what points that person's making, and I try and work out whether, first of all, they genuinely didn't like it, or whether they're writing from some sort of agenda or perspective that perhaps they wouldn't like any boarding school book. Are they the kind of people who maybe judge it early and say, I don't want to get into that because of its popularity, it must mean it's too mainstream for me and my choice is this. And obviously it always comes down to that kind of thing. But like theatre reviews, you've got to just take it on the chin, you know, and also remember that you know, one reviewer doesn't change anything, really. Look, if everybody's telling you you're rubbish, then you probably are rubbish. So, I mean, that's probably a good indication. But having said that, I think if you're too easily swayed by what some reviewer who has his own taste or her own taste says, I think you end up then sort of being too needy. There's something a little bit too desperate about that. So you've got to be a bit stronger and feel, well, I might get knocked around a bit, but I'm going to hold my course.
You've spoken of Roald Dahl as one of your influences. Yeah. Did that kind of sadistic writing creep in with Spud? When you kind of torture the main character?
Certainly, and I think that black comedy is a part of my writing, and I also learned from people like Roald Dahl and John Irving that you need to be brutal with your characters. You can't be too indulgent with them. So, I mean, for example, knocking off Gecko is quite a brutal thing to do. But from that moment on, people read Spud and worry, or read it with a sense of danger, like something might happen to even Spud. And they worry that I might kill people at any moment. So it gives you that once you've done it once, and then obviously Mad Dog, I knocked him off in the second by being expelled. And he was bolted out of the story. So people were like, oh my word, he's like killing a man an episode here, you know, who's going to go in the third one? But the nice thing is, then you don't have to. But you already have got that sense that they want to know what's going to happen here, because they know the cost can be large. So yes, there is that element, and I like that. I like being brutal with my characters. Like I like the notion. I love the notion that this is the end, and I've said goodbye to them. And for a lot of people, that's just very sudden. How can we just, like, all these characters we love, how can they be gone? But they are. That's it. Four stories, and they're over.
So we've spoken about how your characters are often exaggerated members of your family or people that you knew. Did you remove yourself and your family as you moved along through the series more?
It's interesting. People who know me now say that they see me as totally different to Spud. And that's quite interesting, because although I'm using my experience as Spud, there's also a slight sense that Spud is, he's got my soul, and he's certainly a doubter like me. He second guesses himself like me. He's insecure like me. And I was insecure like that in front of girls, where I seemingly made a lot of blunders. And so there's certain things that I've used for Spud, but ultimately, I think we've kind of moved in different directions, and he's his own man, and I see him very clearly in my head. And when I see Spud walking out those school gates, I don't see myself, I see him. And I see the Crazy Eight as something outside of myself, as opposed to I am part of the Crazy Eight, etc. And perhaps that's because I've spent way too much time with those people in my head. I mean, it can't be healthy. I mean, who thinks of these kind of weird characters? But, having said that, there's very little I regret from the series. And I think now to be at the end and to have that feeling, I think is really positive.
Speaking of girls, the girls in the new book especially are very interesting characters.
Yes.
And we have a lot of crazy girls throughout the entire series.
Yes.
What inspired the girls?
Well, girls are crazy, of course. I mean, everybody knows that. We just, we're not allowed to say so. But, I wanted to shake the bag a bit in this. Obviously he's got his 3 girls who've occupied his mind for many years. But I thought it's quite interesting to bring in a few sort of fling type girls in this last one, and I wanted Spud to have flings, because flings are encouraging. You have a fling with a pretty girl, you suddenly think your stakes are rising, and then you crash down to earth and nothing else happens. And obviously he gets a stalker in this book, which is fascinating. And I love that idea of Spud getting a stalker, and also that how it turns from him being quite attracted to this woman to then being utterly terrified of her and sort of not answering her letters, and her letters sort of become more and more aggro and forceful and sort of disturbing as they go. But I think I have such a strong women and girl following of Spud, and they love it for all different sorts of reasons. And I think more than anything they like to see the stupidity of man and laugh at boys, and I think also to throw in a few kind of crazy girls. I think it was only right in the end that they didn't come off completely unscathed.
Still Maharaj on Facebook asks, why does Spud only have 4 years of high school?
Well, it's quite often asked, and it's obviously due to the fact that in the 90s and before that, private schools would start generally at grade 9. They had a grade 8 class, but it was generally a very small year, and all the prep schools would go up to grade 8. So that changed towards the end of the 90s. So I went to Michael House in grade 9 with most of the other boys who'd come from prep schools, but I'd done a year of high school actually in a government school before, Beechwood Boys, before it became Northwood. So that's the reason, is in those days you would start in grade 9, and I think because Spud's quite young, they all assume he's in grade 8, and then they don't quite understand why I've skipped a year, but it's generally, it's grade 9, 10, 11 and 12, the 4 years.
Over the years, the Gov's become my go-to man for reading books and book suggestions.
Yes.
How do you come up with what books he's going to give Spud?
Well, it's quite simple, really. I mean, I use the books that I not only love, but books that I felt would make a telling contribution to Spud's story, and somehow would either challenge his story or reinforce his story or reflect his story. And the Gov obviously is that spiritual guide. He's the sort of the mentor gone wrong character who's feeding amazing stuff about books and getting him to read, but he's also pouring red wine to a 13-year-old's glass. And there's something deliciously sort of anti-establishment about the Gov. I love writing him. He's one of my favorite characters to write because he's so freeing and because he's so anti-establishment, and he can say pretty much anything. But certainly that reading list are books that not only inspired me, but inspired the writing of Spud. For example, Catch-22. I doubt I would have written Spud without reading Catch-22. So if ever you want to look for one book that is the inspiration, it would be that.
In Exit Pursued by a Bear, the Gov mentions that he's beginning to write his memoirs. Would you consider a Spud spin-off?
No, I don't think so. Look, it's tempting. It's always tempting, and I'll never say never. Like Spud going to university, what have you. It's tempting, but I honestly want to try and keep the legacy of this project intact. And I think if I end it now, I have a feeling Spud will be read for many years to come. But if I write on, and the arc goes down, and I love the idea of getting out on top, I sense that perhaps Spud wouldn't be quite as cherished. And I think I'd rather have people going, I wish there was another Spud. Having said that, if I'm still 70 years old and people are going, please write another Spud, there might be murder. But, that's also what, the worst things to happen than to be remembered for a book you wrote.
Tell me about the Spud Trust.
The Spud Trust is something I've set up because I guess after everything that's happened to me, the wonderful things that have happened to me, I have a desire to give something back. And I see a great need in particularly the townships of South Africa, in the rural areas, the less developed areas, the people who have been marginalized in our country. And it's my great desire to bring reading, to bring drama, to bring art, the things that I felt passionately in love with, and the things that changed my life, a creative life. There are so many people with creative ability in this country, but they just don't have the access to it. So I've set up the Spud Trust to try and collaborate with people to form strategic partnerships that is going to benefit South Africans. So obviously over my time I've met up with some big corporate groups, book companies, through the film I've made contacts. And aside from that, also now making contacts with people who can identify to me specific needs, specific projects that I can collaborate with, that the Spud Trust can get behind. So it really is an open, broad perspective, and I think this is something that moving forward I really want to feel like I can contribute. I did a schools project, a township schools project in 2001 before I started writing Spud, where I toured to 40 schools in the townships of KZN directing a water production. Now, they couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak isiZulu or any indigenous language, and we kind of got through the language of theatre and physicality. I was able to direct them, and I was struck by just the talent and the zest and the passion for this creativity. And I think since then I've always wanted to do something. So that's what the Spud Trust is, and we've set up a website, thespudtrust.com, and if anybody wants to send me a message or join in the fight and help in any way, is to check it out. Spud's running it himself, and he sends out a regular newsletter, so it's a way to keep up with Spud too. So I've got big plans, and I'm looking forward to seeing the Spud Trust really deliver for people in South Africa.
I know we've already had an interview about the Spud movie, but let's just briefly mention it as part of your story.
Yes.
How did the movie come about?
Well, the movie came about. Ross Garland took me out to coffee in 2005, and at that stage he'd only done one film, Carmen and Kailicha, but had won the Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, and he arrived, and he had the Ray-Bans, and he had the sort of cut-off jacket, drove old Land Rover, and he just looked very cool. And I thought immediately, this guy knows what he's doing. And he sat me down to coffee, and he started talking in a language that I was just blown away by, and a vision for Spud. And I mean, of course I thought he was smoking something. I mean, he was talking about getting a major British star to play the Gov and to shoot it on location at Michael House, and an all South African film to be funded by South African money. And I mean, there's all this stuff that I was like, well, brilliant, but what are the chances of that happening? And just unbelievably over the years, those boxes have been ticked off one by one, and it's all, look, it's taken a long time, but it all fell into place eventually. And I've learned not to be precious. In the early days I fought very hard for the preciousness of what I'd created. But I finally got to the feeling that diaries are very hard to turn into film, very difficult, because they are episodic by nature, and they don't have a sort of coherent storyline necessarily. There's sort of lots of little threads that form together to bind. And so I was thrilled with the first movie. I thought it was a really good film, and for a South African film to come up with something that good and that strong, I thought was excellent. And then likewise, I can't wait to see what's coming out in the second film, which is going to be more comedic and I think more helter-skelter. So I want to see how that also plays out.
Kareem Preston on Twitter asked, what do you think Durban and KwaZulu-Natal can do to encourage movies coming and filming here? Well,
it's tough here because we don't have a lot of money for film here. There's talk of the studios being built here in Durban. I think that would be an excellent start. I think there's some really good government initiatives, rebates and sort of that help make filmmaking possible. And I think that's all over South Africa. But it's difficult in Durban. Cape Town's got 30,000 odd people working in the film industry, and that's where the powerhouse is. Johannesburg too, obviously a strong television industry, but it feels like we are a little bit behind, and I don't think it's for lack of talent. Durban's never lacked for creative talent, but we lose a lot of our creative talent. People go elsewhere to make it happen. But that's okay. I think Durban is a destination, a shooting destination, and KZN is a fantastic shooting destination. It's a lot cheaper to shoot in Cape Town, and I think more and more films are getting made now, and I think thanks to the government support, and I think the support from the industry, I think we're turning the corner with film, and I think Spud is just part of a whole generation now of new South African films that are coming out that aren't necessarily totally obsessed with our political, racial, social weirdness of our past, and are now sort of telling stories of everyday people here in South Africa. And we're seeing that in literature too. So I think we, at the beginning, the dawn of something new and great in South African filmmaking and in all our sort of artistic endeavors. And I think we're finally getting the hang of starting to tell stories, real stories that aren't necessarily that same iconic story of hurt and political retribution and what we've been through in this country.
So now that Spud's done, what's next?
Well, I'm going to make a little jaunt back to theatre next year. Ben Voss and I and Aaron McElroy, who plays Spud's dad in the movie, has formed a theatrical group called the Insanity League, and we plan to unleash something quite extraordinary next year on South African stages. That's an immediate project. There's talk that Ross and I might get involved in writing a screenplay together, an original screenplay, and then of course there's Spud 3 and Spud 4, which is the talk of that is getting louder and louder. So certainly projects ahead. I wouldn't mind having another go at a serious play, and I wouldn't mind dabbling for a while. So I think it's going to be a year of dabbling. And then we'll see. I'm very aware that the next book I write is going to be very important, because everyone's going to be saying, well, let's see what he does next. And it's either going to burn off a lot of fans or attract new fans, but I'm not going to rush that one. I want that to be a really good book when I finally get to it, and it's going to be something very different. It won't be teen-based, and it's not going to be a diary. It's going to be something that you haven't seen from me yet, but hopefully something that elevates and perhaps is even better than Spud. I mean, I've got to aim for getting better and better. I don't want Spud to be the highlight of my career, although it may be. I may have to live with that, but I hope that the arc is still upwards.